Welcome to the 30th video in the Just In Case series, sponsored by Quality and Equality, an OD consultancy firm based in Oxford, United Kingdom. And my name is Mayan, and I'm the director of the firm. We made this series just in case. It's just in case you need refreshing about a topic, you need to learn something, or you need to be reminded. And today, our contributor is very well known, not just in UK, but in the global scene, and is Dr. Naomi Stanford, who is a brilliant organization design practitioner, teacher, and author. And her earlier UK career was just amazing. She worked for very, very big name multinational, including Pricewaterhouse and British Airways, Marks and Spencer, Xerox. And then she lived and worked in America for many years, working as an OD design specialist. And then when she returned to UK, she worked for the central government. And today, Naomi introduced us to the concept of organization design and detail its history so we understand the context for this helpful field. And when Naomi and I talk about, out of all these wonderful topics that she able to give a talk, which one should she focus? I'm the one who backed her to start with OD, Organization Design 101, so that for those OD practitioners who never have a chance to understand the field, that they will actually learn about what this is about. And in this video, Naomi explained the two main approaches to org design, detailing how they sometimes work with or contradict with each other. And she then shares a range of organizations as case study to illustrate, about certain organization design principle. Before showing how you, if you are one of the audience that want to become specializing in OD, organization design, then she showed you how to. Her teaching is so helpful and so clear. So I enjoy myself so much when I was reviewing this video, and trust that you have the same experience. Naomi, thank you for your investment of your time and effort to support the field learning by offering people this video. So over to you, Naomi.
Thanks very much, Mian. And it's really lovely for me to be here with you and with the audience listening to this. A little bit about me before we launch into this presentation. I've been in organization design for a number of years now, probably at least 3 decades. So more than a number of years, a lot of time. And it's changing a lot now, and it has changed a lot in the past. And what this presentation is about is organization design for someone who doesn't really know what it is and who wants to get some basic grounding in it. And where I've got my basic grounding is in a range of organizations. I've been in big multinationals like British Airways and Marks and Spencer and Xerox. I've been an internal consultant, I've been an external consultant, and I've worked in the US for 13 years, in fact, and in the UK. I've also worked in China and the Middle East. I do quite a lot of work. And now I'm liaising with Singapore, and I've become a special advisor to the Singapore Civil Service College. So all very exciting times. And obviously I tweet and write about organization design a lot as well. And so this 101, I'm going to try and answer 5 questions in this. So the 5 questions are, the first one is what's organization design, and a little bit of history so that you can see how it's changing. Then how do you actually do it? Because there are multiple ways of kind of doing organization design. And then thinking about some good practice in organizations and which organizations are kind of well known for having good organization design, or sometimes have had problems with it and retrieved themselves and that kind of thing. Because it doesn't always work that well. And then if you are interested in taking this sort of beginner course further, how do you actually become a practitioner? Where do you go for help? That kind of thing. And then some takeaways from this 25 minutes or so. Well, I use a kind of clunky definition, which I find really helpful. Um, so it's about intentional arrangement of the business elements. And that is the first stumbling block for people are what are the business elements? And generally speaking, they are what can be codified in some way. So can you write a business process for it? What are your policies? What is your organization chart? So that kind of thing. And so it's thinking about how those work together to do the work necessary. And often, if you think about organizations, they're doing a lot of unnecessary work. And a lot of work can be cut out. But this is about doing the work that's actually necessary to effectively and efficiently achieve a business purpose. Now, that business purpose is becoming a very interesting point at the moment in organizations, because is the business purpose making money if you're a for-profit, or is it about people and planet even if you are in the business of making money? And what's a business purpose for a non-profit or a government, etc.? So it's about achieving a business purpose and then your strategy to achieve that purpose. Now, you've got several things there to think about, so I'll just go over those bits again before we move into the final bit of it. So what are the business elements? How do we know we're doing the work that's actually necessary? And how do we determine what our business purpose is and what our strategy is to deliver that? And then all the time you're trying to bear in mind high quality customer and employee experience into some uncertain future. And again, those two are kind of problematic in some respects because some people think customers are more important than employees. Some organizations think employees are more important than customers. And you kind of get a tension between serving the customer well and looking after your employees well. And there have been some very high profile cases recently on that. Uber is one that springs to mind. If you start to look at the history of Uber, lots of court cases going on as they try and balance that tension about employee or not employee, if you're taking that line, and customer. And so once you've sort of thought through those elements of what it actually is, then what you're doing is intentional arrangement. So you're really thinking through what your organization should be like. So there's this word aligning that you'll hear a lot in organization design with the strategy. You're creating something that's coherent, that makes sense to people, and you're building trust. And that is a very nebulous point that is quite difficult to design in. Do your customers and your employees trust the organization, essentially? And that's where you get things like brand discussions, that type of thing. So if you start to think carefully about that definition and what the outcome is and the method, you start to get a view that you're working with a complex system. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as we go through. So moving on, just to give you a little bit of history of this. So the history of organization design is also very interesting. And it began in the sort of early 1900s, essentially, when at the start of the Industrial Revolution, when people moved from working more or less on a self-employed basis as a candlestick maker or whatever it was, into mass production. And the earliest example is the Ford production, which is the kind of one that is quoted a lot. Although there are early examples of building railroads, and you'll see the first organization chart is about a railroad building company in the US, which is a very nice organization chart, actually. But those were all arranged on a sort of principle that people were kind of mechanical parts, in a sense. You could put them on a production line and they would produce 100 screws or put 100 screws into a car chassis or whatever it was. Very, very mechanical, not a sort of humanistic view. And you can gradually see over decades a progression from thinking about organizations as a closed mechanical system, a bit, in fact, like a car, that is a closed mechanical system, into something where the mechanism has some human element. So now you've got the sort of analogy of a car and a driver, into a much more open system where the whole thing is, what are the boundaries of the organization? If you're designing a manufacturing plant for a vehicle, for example, do you bring your suppliers into it? Do your customers and staff have a voice in how you're organizing it, etc.? So you can see that gradual shift from closed towards open. And then towards the 1970s and 80s, you get the idea of much more fluid structures around the actual organization. So rather than being traditional hierarchical leader at the top, then lots of layers of staff, you get the idea that of shared accountability, in fact. So you might be making a car for a particular model of a vehicle, say a Ford vehicle, for an Indian market. So you've got the car model and the Indian market, or you might be making it for the African market, and then you've got a different potential customer base, so they need different tweaks to the vehicle. So you've got two elements coming into play there, and that starts to give you a matrix structure. And then you start to move into this piece we're sort of grappling with now about self-management. And you hear a lot about self-management. Can you organize into self-managing teams? And you'll see the roots of that in things like lean production, particularly pioneered by Toyota, where they were thinking about how do we get a whole work team to really think through how to design and develop a car on a small team basis, essentially. And that is starting to work around systems and ecosystems where you've got two sets of things connecting together but working fairly independently, but the interconnections are absolutely critical. And now towards this era, we're moving much more, and it's much more complex to think around, is the sort of organic nature that organizations are actually more akin to living systems which grow and evolve in response to their context. And you can see, as you start to look at, even if you just look at an organization chart, which I'll come to in a minute, you can see the chart shapes are changing. And as we use more and more data and data analytics, it allows different visuals of the organization as well. So you can see that the history is from mechanical towards organic and evolutionary. And it's worth, again, if you're interested in organization design, looking more at that history of it, because that starts to give you a view of where some of the difficulties arise, because older organizations tend to be more mechanistic, and they are having quite a struggle to become more organic and self-managing. But I am going to show you a really nice example of one organization that's achieved that. There are two kind of main approaches which are somewhat contradictory, and sometimes you work them together, so just bear with this. The first approach is a programmatic approach, where you have a view of what you want to achieve, and then you set up essentially a formal project to do that. So you want to merge two divisions by the 1st of September or something like that. And that is a programmatic approach, and you sort of march through the steps of a program. And if you don't know project or program management, I do thoroughly recommend that as a learning for you to take, because it's a very, very useful skill in all types of organization design. And this programmatic approach basically has 6 steps. So the first, which I call step 0, because people quite often don't actually do it, they just launch into the design, is entry and contracting. What is it that you're entering? What are you doing? And how do you contract with whoever is the client? And client is, I use the term consultant and client, whether you're internal or external. It's someone who's doing the work and someone who's commissioned the work. Now, often you go into a project and they say, we want to make the organization more efficient or something like that. And you spend quite a lot of time in that first entry and contracting trying to work out what the actual either problem or opportunity is. And also, just as a hint, try not to think in terms of problems all the time, because a lot of the time people are thinking they're trying to solve a problem. But in fact, that is another way of looking at that is, what is the opportunity here? If we want to become more efficient, how do we take that as an opportunity? So the first phase is, what are we actually doing? The second phase is assess what's going on here. And each phase has some outputs and some typical tools that you can use to help you work through that phase. The third phase is design. Now, unfortunately, in my experience, a lot of organizations just want you to leap straight into design. They're not interested in the entry and contracting. They're not interested in you finding out what's going on. Just make it happen. And that invariably has enormous problems, because you don't know what the context is for designing. It's rather like being asked to design a teacup and you don't know whether the person is able to grasp a handle. You don't know if they want a little lid on their teacup. You don't know if they like a round cup or a square cup. There's all sorts of things that you need to find out before you start designing. And it's very, very like good product design, which I'll come onto again shortly. Then the fourth phase is planning to transition. Again, this is where you need project methodologies. And you don't have to go overboard on these. You don't have to become a sort of Microsoft project expert or a Prince 2 expert. You simply have to know that you need to have a plan that has got timescales, that marks into dependencies, etc. And although quite often on most projects I work with, I have a project manager who's formally qualified in project management working alongside me. Then part of your plan is, how are we going to move from where we are now into the new thing? So if you're merging two departments, for example, or two divisions, how do you actually do it? Do you do it in one big bang? 1st of September will just be one new division. Or do you start to say, we'll have a rolling program, we'll start to phase it in gradually? And these are very conscious design choices that you have to think about. And then the final phase of this programmatic approach is optimize, where you are doing your best to make sure that the project that you've been involved in is actually working. And unfortunately, I've never been able to get paid as an external consultant for this phase, but it is absolutely critical. And if you're an internal consultant, it's a whole lot easier, because it's just like moving into a new house. You think it's designed, but then you notice there are cracks in the wall, or one of the floorboards is missing, or something's gone wrong or something. You've got a whole snagging list. And that's essentially the same with organisation design. You have to keep on checking that it's actually doing what it's intended to do. Now, that programmatic approach is still used a lot, particularly if you know what you're trying to achieve, a merger, for example. The second approach, which I'm going to move on to now, is this approach based in design thinking. So it's come out of product design. And again, there are lots of ways of thinking about it. But basically, you're beginning with empathizing. What are we actually doing here? What is the issue that we're looking at? What are we trying to solve? Why isn't it efficient, etc.? And you're working with groups of people who actually do the work. So I'll take an example of customer complaints. So the customer complaints, it's very easy to say, we must reduce customer complaints, and just head on it like that. Now, if you're going for this design approach, you go and ask the people in the call centre, what is going on here? What makes your job easy or difficult to solve customer complaints? What are the typical complaints you come across? And you're trying to really sort of live their experience. And the good designers actually do live their experience. They try out being a customer call centre agent for a while to see what it feels like. And it's very interesting, that approach, because you see all sorts of things which wouldn't typically come to the attention of a leader. Like their breaks are too short, for example, so they can't compare notes. And there has been some very interesting research done on precisely that, the length of coffee breaks and how they're used for workers to exchange notes on what's going on in their calls, and how they can start to solve the customer questions more effectively. So that whole empathy is the start point. Then you start to go down to here, why is it important? Why is it important to solve customer complaints? Does it actually matter? And in some cases, it doesn't particularly matter. If you take Ryanair, they don't particularly care, or didn't in the past, at all about customer complaints. All they were interested in is getting their customers there on time and do a fast turnaround. So you have to really think through, is this actually important? And you create a point of view. And that is a very, very different method, because on the programmatic method, you've made an assumption that whatever it is you're being asked to do is actually important. So you've got empathize and then define. And you can see it's in a loop, because that is sort of a divergent thinking. Then you start to go over to ideate. How do we start to solve it? So you're going round and up before we get back to test in a second. But you do a test here of, is it important? Here. You potentially can't see the slide, but you can work that out. So how do we ideate? There are multiple ways. And one of the other issues about traditional organization design is people tend to think there's one right answer. There never is one right answer. And if you just start to think about that example I gave a minute ago about the teacup, there are millions and millions of types of teacups, masses of ways of solving an issue around how do we drink a cup of tea. And this is why I enjoy this design theory approach, is because it allows you to be, again, divergent in what are the ways of solving this. And that is missed out in the programmatic approach quite often. But you can, in fact, you can take the programmatic approach and involve yourself in some of the areas of the design approach simultaneously. So it doesn't have to be either or. So you empathize, define, test your definition, expand the definition and the test from the first part again, and then prototype. And now you'll start to see a big difference, because a lot of organization design practitioners are now suggesting that we prototype. And you'll start to hear interesting new phrases like, should we create a digital twin? And I love that phrase, because what they're doing is creating a kind, if you imagine an online game, they're creating a computer simulated environment of the organization and then testing it out. They've created what's called a digital twin of the organization, using big data and data analytics and what have you. And that is in its very early stages, but I think will increase a lot. And again, the motor companies are quite advanced in some of this, not necessarily on their organization design, but on their product design. So you'll see interesting work going on creating a digital twin of a vehicle, so that the drivers can sort of actually sit in it on screen and start driving it in the simulated environment. And that is a very lovely future look at organization design, the prototyping. Even in the programmatic method, I strongly urge you to test before you launch into something in small, not very high profile pockets of the organization. If we're going to move into, this may sound old fashioned at this point, open plan seating compared with offices, does that actually work? How does it affect the workflow? If we're going to move into remote working from face-to-face working, how would that work? And then you can test it out. And that prototyping is a critical component, which is actually gaining a lot of credibility in organization design circles now. What I hope you've got so far is that organization design is actually about thinking about a whole system. You can't think about bits of it. Go back to the definition that I showed you about the elements. They all have to work together. And again, if you take a vehicle analogy, if you've got a four-wheeled vehicle and you suddenly decide you don't like the design of one of the wheels, it's going to be very difficult to put on a completely differently designed wheel and get the same performance. The car has been designed to perform with the four wheels which are the same. So you start to think about an organization in that integrated systems approach. with one difference. Remember, an organization, and it's a major difference, is not a mechanical system. It's very, very organic. You can have no way of predicting how the people are going to perform in it, etc., etc. In a way, if you think about a vehicle, you can say, well, we don't know how the drivers are going to perform, which is true, we don't. And we don't know how the engineers who keep it serviced are going to perform. So you can see the sort of a similar analogy, but an organization is on a much bigger scale, because it's basically, an organization doesn't exist without people for the most part. Not yet. I think they're going to come. You'll have totally only automated organizations soon. But we'll wait and see on that. So again, I've suggested that you think about project management as a possibility. If you also now think about ramping up your skills in systems and complexity thinking, and that is absolutely key. And what you're trying to do is understand the big picture. And I won't go through each of these, but this is a very nice graphic of the types of skills you need as a systems thinker to do organization design work. First, what is the big picture? And this can be difficult. If someone's asked you to go and sort out a call center problem, that you might just decide to focus on that, but you don't know where that sits in the bigger picture. Where are call centers in how the organization operates? What other things do you have to think about? What other elements? And you start to think it's very important to think about the big picture. So that's the first point. The second thing is to start thinking about not coming to a solution too quickly. That's where the design thinking mindset comes into play. That you don't, what in my circles are called, solutionize at the beginning. Because it's often very easy to think, right, we'll just do this. And that is invariably a mistake. Well, perhaps not invariably, but very often a mistake. The third thing that I find very, very helpful, and I do it more and more, is testing people's assumptions. What do we think is happening here? What are our assumptions around it? And, if you just take that call center example again, you might assume that the call center operators don't know what they're talking about. You might assume that they don't have enough guidance. You might assume the equipment doesn't work. The thing is, you might assume that the customers are all wrong and everything's perfectly fine. The thing is that you don't know what other people are basing their assumptions on. And so if you don't have a full picture of the various forms of assumption, you don't know what exactly you're looking at. So that assumption testing is critical. And again, you see that coming into play a lot in design thinking. So 3 things which are absolutely critical: big picture, don't come to a quick solution, spend time on thinking through the various options, and test assumptions as you go right the way through. And just to reinforce it, if you're not sure about systems thinking, there are multiple courses on it. And it's a very, very helpful skill for organization designers. The one that is being quoted most at the moment is Hire. And it is a very, very interesting organization. One point to bear in mind, and I'm beginning to notice this, is it's been able to evolve in the way it has, which I'll explain, because I think, but that's one of my assumptions, that they've had the same CEO for well over 30 years. So the person at the top has guided through all these changes. Now, if I start to think about organizations which can manage change, which have begun in the early 80s and have moved right the way through to now and evolve very well and rapidly, they all have a fairly stable CEO. And so that might be a defining factor, but I'm not sure yet. So when Hire was first set up, it makes white goods in China. It was very, very hierarchical. And then it moved into a sort of what they call an inverted triangle, and Starbucks tried that as well. Again, with some success, that you give the employees more of a voice and they get the permissions essentially to speak truth to power, or whatever phrase you want to use, and they actually inform how the organization is operated, but it still maintains a control system which is essentially hierarchical. So they're balancing employee voice with the hierarchy. And then Hire has moved on to where it is now, which is these self-managed teams in competing, quite often, ecosystems. So fridges is the ones, refrigerators is what's most commonly quoted. You have different models of refrigerator. Each end-to-end refrigerator is designed and managed by a team, and they are self-managing. Now, clearly, there are some interdependencies, because you can't have every team for every refrigerator setting up their own supply chain, for example. So when you're managing that idea of self-management, it is within the broader context of supply chains, of geopolitical regulations, of trade deals, and all the rest of it. But basically, the smaller teams are making all the decisions. And Hire is managing this incredibly well. And there are multiple case studies on Hire of how they've managed that evolution over more than 30 years, which also suggests that you can't leap from bureaucracy to self-managing teams in one leap. It's a progression. So try and resist the idea that you'll suddenly, if you're in a bureaucracy, that you're suddenly going to become agile overnight. That is not going to happen. Even if people want it to. So take a look at Hire. As I said, multiple case studies on it. And very, very interesting organisation. But it isn't the only one. There are smaller ones and larger ones. The ones I'm going to show you now are predominantly Western culture ones, but you'll see some very interesting African ones emerging, and particularly around mobile telecoms. And quite a lot in India are quite interesting. There's a very nice dairy production cooperative, which is a sort of self-managing cooperative. And you'll see Liquid Organisation, which is, again, a self-managing organisation. Pixar has a very non-traditional way of developing its films through creative tensions. Patagonia, you may know well, is all about sustainability and recycling and giving back to the planet, and very, very strong on that. And what you're seeing in these types of organisations is a very, very clear strategy and purpose. And that is the beginning point. And again, Hire has a clear strategy and a clear purpose. When you're beginning organisation design work on a project, if people don't know what the strategy is and they can't tell you what the purpose is, that's where you have to begin. Because you cannot design something if you don't know what it's for. So if I go back to the teacup, are we designing a teacup for a disabled person who can't hold one with a handle, for example? Strategy, purpose, then you can design. And often organisation designs are not clear on their strategy and they're not clear on their purpose, which sounds bizarre, but I found it true quite a lot of the time. And so all of these are worth looking at. The Buurtzorg one is a Dutch healthcare company, again, very, very often quoted. Zoom has done an incredible job over the last several months of ramping up very, very fast and responding very rapidly to customer feedback on this performance. It's gone from, I can't remember the exact numbers, but 10 million users, say, to 300 million users in a very short period of time, and making very rapid strides. Salesforce is a very interesting organisation to take another look at as well. And all of these are being kind of modern and organic and responsive and paying attention to their employees, but in very different ways. So be aware that when you hear things like we must become agile, that doesn't mean adopting Salesforce's methodology. It means thinking about what would be agile in our context. And again, that's quite often a difficulty to put across to leaders. You cannot just adopt something that sounds like everybody is doing it. We've got lots of examples. Lean is one. Where is lean? Total quality management. Where is total quality management? People jump on bandwagons. All of these organizations that are Patagonia, Birdsdog, Zoom, etc., have thought things through. They're not bandwagon type organizations. So take a look around you for good practice organizations. You are a customer and a consumer and a citizen. You'll kind of get a feel for what's a good practice organization yourself. And it's worth thinking about that as you experience different organizations from your own perspective. There are multiple ways of doing that as well. I've spent quite a number of years now as a member of the Organisation Design Forum and the European Organisation Design Forum. They are very closely linked. So although the European one tends to be more Europe-based and the Organisation Design Forum is more US-based, in fact, they do a lot of work together. And they are basically looking to a membership around practitioners. If you start to look at the organizational design community, that is much more academics. So you've got a link there between academic organization design, the sort of theoretical underpinnings of it all, which again it's got a big membership. It started to run webinars. It's a very interesting organization to be part of. And they are also doing some things jointly with the other two organizations, the Organisation Design Forum and the European one. So you start to see these are three membership organizations. If you want an actual training course, Ashridge does advanced strategic organization design, Ashridge Holt, which is not necessarily for the beginner, but people do find it very, very helpful. Roffey Park Institute in the UK now does similarly. Both of those have been face-to-face and are now, elements of them are online. And then you've got Caliber Consulting, which is one that I work with in the Middle East, all online, and a new one that's coming into play, predominantly aimed at government and in the US at the moment, but hoping to move into other government design work, LBL strategies. So look around for organization design programs. Coursera offers free introductory courses, sort of taster courses in organization design, which is also, they're also very good background pieces for you to pick up on. And things like FutureLearn has done them in the past. FutureLearn has a very good program on systems thinking. So there are various methods of entering the field. And begin by joining one of these organizations and participating in one of the member organizations, participating in their webinars, their community conversations, their networking. They both run, ODF and EODF run mentoring schemes, etc. What I hope that you've got from it are four things, really. One, that you're actually interested now in organisation design. What on earth is it? How could I enter the field? Would it be fun for me? The second thing is how you actually start to approach it and what it is. So what is organisation design? Could you now kind of explain it to yourself or to other people? And can you talk about two approaches that you might take towards it? And then how you might interweave the approaches and get the best from the programmatic approach and the design thinking approach. A couple of examples of good practice that you could look into. And those organisations, they are all over the place, and some of them are very small. And do take a look at the ones that are in your experience. Start to think that was a good experience as a customer or consumer. What made it good for me? And then you should by this point have an idea of where to go and look for more information. So I hope you've enjoyed that. And again, thanks to Jan for inviting me to give this small talk on organisation design. And good luck with your organisation design explorations.
On behalf of everyone, may I say a big thank you to you, Naomi, for the insightful and thorough explanation of org design. And thank you for sharing your deep and rich and valuable wisdom and making your thinking available to so many people. I'm grateful for you taking the time to do this. And any one of you who like to contact Naomi to continue this conversation, or link up with her about certain thoughts and ideas. Her email and her contact information and her bibliography, not to mention her books, are all listed at the end of this video. So a big thank you again to you audience for making the time to listen to Just In Case video. Send us a feedback form about this. And then also thank you, Naomi, for all your wisdom.